The world had ways of creating monsters, but Luca's Morty wasn't born one. He was shaped into it, carved the way a sculptor chisels stone, each blow of life sharpening what remained and breaking away everything soft. People called him Il-Gigant not because of his size, though his height alone made most men step back, but because of the weight he carried inside him. It wasn't the kind of thing that showed in photographs or in the whispering gossip of the streets. It was something people felt when he entered a room, the shift in the air, the tightening of spines, the instinct that said danger even when he said nothing at all. Silence was Lucas's language. It wasn't born from shyness or hesitation. It was born from knowing that when he spoke, people listened, and when they listened, they trembled. His presence had always been too much, too large, too intense. Even before he took control of the Morty Syndicate, even before blood stained his knuckles and loyalty tattooed itself into his bones, he knew he was not the kind of man people relaxed around. His shadow alone made men straighten and women lower their eyes. But women still came to him, at first. They always did, drawn to the legend before they ever learned the man. They saw the tailored suits, the power in his walk, the way his voice, quiet, low, felt like heat against the skin. They mistook danger for desire, mistook the mystery for something romantic. They chased the myth until they reached the man. It never took long. One night, sometimes half a night. One look into his eyes, too sharp, too intense, too honest, and they would flinch. One moment of feeling the force of his presence, and their breath caught with something that wasn't excitement anymore but fear. And when they realized that Lucas wasn't just physically overwhelming, but emotionally, psychologically, profoundly so, they ran. Every single one ran. He lied to himself for years, told himself it didn't matter, that he didn't need softness or affection or companionship. He had power. He had control. He had the entire city whispering his name in reverence or terror. What more could a man want? But the quiet hours always revealed the truth. The empty penthouse, the untouched bed, the long nights where the only sound was the ticking of a clock he hated. The moments after a job, when blood was still drying on his skin, and he would catch himself wishing, just for a second, that someone was waiting for him, someone who didn't tremble when he walked into the room. But women only loved the distance. They loved the fantasy. No one had ever loved the man. Lucas told himself he was built wrong. Too big, too dangerous, too carved from darkness, too heavy for anyone to hold. The world had a way of making him believe it. Every rejection whispered it. Every frightened look proved it. Every woman who turned away confirmed it. So he built walls higher than his reputation. He buried softness beneath violence, and slowly he stopped expecting anything else. Until one afternoon, the elevator doors to his private floor slid open, and a woman stepped out. She walked down the corridor toward him with steady breaths, carrying a case close to her chest, unaware of the way shadows curled around him like warning signs. He looked up, expecting the usual reaction, the quick inhale, the shrinking posture, the instinctive retreat. But she didn't step back. Her eyes met his, dark and curious, unflinching in a way that made his heart jolt in his chest. Not with fear, not with caution. She looked at him as if she wasn't seeing the giant at all, only the man. And for the first time in a very long time, Lucas Morty felt the world shift. Lucas watched her approach as if time had slowed into a thick, heavy silence. Most people hesitated after the first 3 steps. She didn't. She moved with a soft confidence, her gaze taking in the dimly lit workshop he kept hidden from the world, the instruments hanging on the walls, the carved wood pieces that revealed a secret no one knew about him. She noticed everything, even the quiet tension in his shoulders, and yet nothing in her face suggested fear. Her name was Ada. She spoke it softly when he asked, and the moment the syllables touched the air, something inside Lucas shifted in a way he couldn't explain. Her voice was warm, like the low hum of a cello, the kind that vibrated against the ribs and settled in the chest. She held a worn instrument case against her body, and when she opened it to reveal the damaged cello inside, Lucas understood immediately why she was there. But he didn't understand why she wasn't trembling. Most women trembled. They felt the weight of him, the coldness of his presence, the quiet power that wrapped around him like a storm waiting to break. But Ada stood close enough that he could feel her breath when she exhaled. She didn't step back when he stepped closer. She didn't hide her eyes when his met hers. Instead, she smiled, a small curve of lips that made his chest tighten, because it held something he had forgotten existed, something dangerous to a man like him. Unjudged warmth. She asked if he could repair the cello. Lucas touched the cracks on the wood with the same gentleness he used on the rare few things he loved. He nodded, but before he could speak, Ada said she wanted to come by and watch him work, that she wanted to see how he brought music back to life. Lucas almost told her no, almost pushed her away before she had the chance to leave on her own. But something in her eyes made him pause, a softness mixed with determination, as if she were searching for something just as broken as her instrument. And in that moment, he wondered if she saw something in him that he had spent a lifetime hiding. The next morning, she returned. No one returned. And when she walked into the workshop again, carrying that same calm energy, Lucas felt something he had never felt in the presence of another person. He felt unguarded, exposed in a way that terrified him, and yet made him want to stand there and let it happen. Ada moved slowly around the room, touching the shelves, breathing in the scent of wood and varnish. When she finally looked at him, her voice was soft but steady. "I'm not afraid of you." Lucas felt the world stop around him, because no one had ever said that before. And he didn't know if it was hope or danger he felt rising in his chest, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. This woman was going to change everything. Ada returned the following day, carrying the quiet confidence of someone who belonged there even though Lucas knew no one ever truly belonged in his world. His men had seen her enter the private elevator and whispered among themselves, confused, uneasy. Women did not come back after meeting Il Gigant. They didn't dare. And yet Ada stepped into the workshop as if it were simply a place she wanted to be rather than a sanctuary protected by a dangerous man. Lucas was already working when she arrived, sanding a delicate section of the cello's ribs, his hands moving with precision that contrasted with the brutal strength he carried everywhere else. Ada paused in the doorway, watching him. There was something in her gaze he could not decipher, something too gentle for someone standing in the presence of a mafia boss. She asked if she could sit and watch. Her voice was soft, but her question carried a quiet boldness. Lucas hesitated, torn between pushing her away or letting her closer. Every instinct said distance was safer. Every instinct told him she would not survive the truth of who he was. But something else, something buried and long forgotten, told him to let her stay. He nodded, and Ada took a seat on a stool near the workbench. She watched with the kind of focus that made Lucas feel exposed. He could sense her eyes following the movements of his hands, tracking the strength in his forearms, studying the careful touch that contrasted with everything people believed about him. In her presence, the usual coldness inside him felt like it was melting, drop by drop. The silence between them was not empty. It pulsed with something unspoken, something growing. Ada broke it gently, asking where he learned to restore instruments. Lucas rarely spoke about himself, but something about her made the truth slip out. He told her about his father, a carpenter who never understood the son who became a criminal, but admired the way Lucas shaped wood with care. He told her how the workshop was the only place where his shadow did not feel like a threat. Ada listened without judgment, and Lucas found himself speaking more than he intended. When she stood to observe a closer detail on the cello, she moved without fear, stepping into his space with an ease that sent a tremor through him. Most people froze when they got close to his sheer size. Ada simply existed beside him, brushing lightly against his arm. The contact was small, but Lucas felt it everywhere, a spark of energy he was not prepared for. He stepped back, unsure, but Ada did not retreat. She turned her head slightly, looking up at him with those steady eyes that seemed to see straight through the walls he had spent years building. "I told you, Lucas, I'm not afraid of you." It was not arrogance, it was truth, and it unsettled him more than any threat ever had, because fear he could control. But acceptance from someone like her, something pure, something gentle, that was the one thing Morty had no defenses against. And that made her the most dangerous person he had ever allowed into his life. Lucas told himself he had control over every inch of his world, that nothing could slip past him unnoticed. Yet Ada moved through the edges of his life like a quiet storm he never saw coming. Every morning she returned, carrying warmth into a place built on shadows, and each day she stayed a little longer, stepped a little closer, asked a little more. Lucas felt it happening, the slow unraveling of the walls he had lived behind for years, walls no one had ever cracked until her. He was repairing the cello's inner seams when he sensed her presence behind him before she spoke. Her footsteps were soft, but he always knew when she entered. He could feel it like a shift in the air, like the room breathed differently with her inside it. She leaned over the workbench, studying the delicate wood, her hair brushing his forearm lightly. A touch so small it should have meant nothing, yet it struck him with the force of a blow. He stepped back instinctively, old fear rising, the fear of letting someone too close, the fear of someone discovering how much space he truly took up, the fear that once she really understood him, she would run like the others. Ada noticed the distance he created, but instead of stepping away, she turned toward him, her eyes steady, as if searching for something he was trying to hide. "You always move away when I get close," she said softly, not accusing, just observing, as if she were reading him the way she read music. Lucas felt his throat tighten, words gathering but refusing to form. Ada moved another step forward, her presence warm against the cold edges of the workshop. She reached out and touched his hand lightly, a gesture so simple it disarmed him completely. "You don't have to be afraid of me," she whispered. And it was the first time in his life someone had said those words, not with fear, not with trembling, but with certainty. Lucas pulled his hand back quickly, his pulse unsteady. "You don't understand," he said, his voice low, rough, torn. She tilted her head, slightly watching him with a calmness that felt impossible in his world. "Then help me understand," she replied. Her innocence in that moment wasn't naivety, it was bravery, the kind he wasn't used to. Lucas could command men with a single glance, but he couldn't command the chaos happening inside his own mind. Ada stepped closer once more, the warmth of her body brushing his chest, and he felt his control slipping. He turned away sharply, pretending to reach for a tool, anything to escape the closeness he wanted too much. Ada exhaled softly behind him, a breath that trembled with something he felt deep in his bones. "Lucas," she said gently, "I'm not going to run." Her voice struck him harder than any bullet. No one stayed once they felt the full magnitude of him, the size of his silence, the weight of his presence, the shadow he carried. But Ada stood there, refusing to move, refusing to retreat, refusing to accept the distance he tried to build between them. And for the first time in his life, Lucas felt more fear than he had ever felt holding a gun, because losing power was nothing compared to the terror of being seen completely, and still hoping she would stay. The storm arrived before anyone saw it coming. A sudden downpour turned the streets into mirrors of trembling light, and the city that usually bowed to Lucas Morty's shadow seemed to hold its breath. Lucas had been pacing the workshop since morning, unable to focus on the cello, unable to shake the memory of Ada's voice telling him she wouldn't run. No one had ever said that before. No one had ever meant it. The weight of her words stayed with him all night, pressing against the walls he'd lived behind for years. He didn't like the feeling. Wanting something meant risking it, and Lucas Morty did not risk, not with his heart, not with anything that could hurt this deeply. When the workshop doors suddenly rattled under a violent knock, Lucas's instincts shifted. He froze for a moment, listening, his senses sharpening like a blade. No one ever knocked. His men announced themselves. Enemies didn't bother. The door burst open, and one of his guards stumbled in, bleeding from the shoulder. His voice was breathless, urgent, terrified in a way Lucas rarely saw in his men. "Boss, they took her." The world narrowed. Lucas felt everything in him go silent, not calm, but deadly. His heartbeat slowed to a cold rhythm as if preparing for war. The guard struggled to speak. A black van ambushed her on 5th. She tried to fight, but there were too many. They knew her name. "Boss, they knew she comes here." Lucas didn't remember moving. One second he stood by the workbench, the next he was grabbing his coat and gun, his eyes burning with a rage he barely controlled. He had feared Ada would run from him. He never imagined someone else would take her from him. His men followed him through the elevator, but none dared speak. The air around Lucas was a force of its own, heavy, sharp, suffocating. He wasn't thinking about the attack or who was behind it. He was thinking only of Ada, her small frame, her gentle voice, her stubborn courage in the face of his darkness. The idea of anyone touching her made something inside him snap. They drove through the storm streets slick, with water flashing lights reflecting off the black car. Lucas didn't blink once. His mind sharpened, every detail falling into place, as if violence had its own language only he understood. Rival gang territory. Correct timing. Targeting his weakness. Ada wasn't just taken, she was hunted. When Lucas arrived at the warehouse his enemies had chosen, as the battleground, he stepped out of the car before anyone else could react. Rain pounded against his shoulders, thunder echoing across the sky. His men called after him, but he didn't hear them. Because over the roar of the storm, he heard something else, a faint, desperate cry coming from inside the building. A voice he knew now better than his own. Ada. In that moment, Lucas became something beyond ill-gigant, something colder, something merciless, something ready to tear apart the entire city brick by brick, if it meant getting her back. And the men inside that warehouse had no idea that they had just declared war on the one man the whole world feared. Lucas Morty was coming for the only person who had ever stepped into his darkness without trembling. And heaven help anyone who stood in his way. The warehouse was a skeleton of rusted iron and shattered windows, a place where screams disappeared into the walls and hope had never lived. Lucas stepped inside with rainwater dripping from his coat, each drop echoing on the concrete like a ticking clock counting down to someone's last breath. His men followed behind him, but even they kept their distance. There was something different in his eyes, now something darker, something feral, something that did not belong to a man, but to a force of nature. The air was sharp with gasoline and damp metal. Somewhere deeper inside, footsteps echoed, followed by a muffled cry Lucas would recognize even in death. Ada. His pulse didn't race. It steadied. Danger always calmed him, but this calm came from something deeper, a cold fury that froze everything except his singular focus. He moved through the shadows with silent precision. The storm outside groaned against the broken roof as lightning flashed and framed Lucas's silhouette on the concrete. A guard lunged at him, a knife raised, but Lucas didn't flinch. One move, one strike, and the man crumpled. No hesitation, no mercy. Nothing mattered now except the voice that had kept him awake nights, the voice the world had dared to threaten. In a far corner of the warehouse, Ada sat bound to a chair, ropes cutting into her wrists, her hair tangled, and her breathing uneven. Two men stood beside her, arguing quietly, one insisting she was worth more alive, the other suggesting they deliver a message to Lucas by ending her right there. That was the moment Lucas stepped from the shadows. He didn't shout. He didn't warn. He moved with such cold efficiency that both men didn't have time to understand that they had already made their final mistake. When the last body hit the floor, Lucas finally looked at her, and the fury melted into something raw, something vulnerable, something that scared him more than any bullet. Ada stared at him with wide eyes, not in fear, but in relief. The moment he cut her free, she collapsed forward into his chest, as if her body finally accepted it was safe. Lucas froze, unsure how to hold something so breakable, but her arms tightened around him, and he felt the tremor in her breath whispering that she was alive, and that was enough to shatter him from the inside. He whispered her name, once low, rough, nearly trembling. Ada pulled back just enough to look up at him, rainwater and tears blending on her cheeks. She searched his face, as if confirming he was real, as if she wasn't sure a man like him would come for her with such fire. Why, she whispered, her voice small, why would you risk everything for me? Lucas didn't answer at first. He didn't know how to speak the truth that had been growing like wildfire inside him. But when he finally found the words, they came out low and unsteady. Because you are the only person who ever walked toward me instead of running. The storm outside roared louder, as if agreeing with the confession he never meant to make. And in that broken warehouse, with danger still lurking beyond the walls, Ada placed her hand on his chest and held it there as if she could feel the truth of him beating beneath her palm. For the first time in his life, Morty didn't feel too big, too dark, or too dangerous. For the first time, he felt chosen. Lucas brought Ada back to his penthouse just before sunrise, a place built high above the city where danger rarely reached. But tonight the walls felt thinner, the air heavier, as if the storm from the warehouse had followed them home. He had expected her to tremble or collapse or ask to leave. Instead, Ada stepped into the dimly lit room and looked around with quiet curiosity, touching the edges of the world he never let anyone see. She moved slowly, running her fingers across the piano keys, the carved wooden instruments on the shelf, the heavy curtains framing the skyline. You live surrounded by music, she whispered, even though everyone believes you live surrounded by violence. Lucas didn't answer. He couldn't. The contrast had always been his curse, the rage he carried in the streets, and the tenderness he hid in the shadows. Ada was seeing all of it, and she wasn't running. That alone made his chest feel too tight, too unfamiliar, too dangerous. He brought her a blanket, and she sat on the couch with it wrapped around her shoulders. The faint bruises on her skin made his jaw clench hard enough to ache. He wanted to find the men responsible. He wanted to tear the city apart. But Ada reached out gently and placed her hand over his before he could rise. "Stay here with me," she said, her voice soft but steady. "You don't have to fight tonight." No one had ever told Lucas to stay. No one had ever wanted him near when he was in this state, a storm contained in a man's frame. But Ada didn't pull away even when he sat beside her, even when the air thickened with everything they weren't ready to name. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and for several long breaths Lucas forgot how to breathe at all. He stayed rigid at first, unaccustomed to softness, unaccustomed to being wanted without conditions. But then her fingers curled lightly into his sleeve, and something inside him loosened as if she had reached into his chest and untied a knot he didn't know existed. The world outside began to brighten slowly, the first hints of dawn touching the sky. Ada lifted her head and looked up at him, her eyes reflecting that early morning light with a truth he wasn't prepared for. "You came for me," she said, as if she still couldn't believe it. Lucas let out a slow breath, the kind that scraped through every dark place he had kept buried. "I will always come for you," he said, and the words felt like a promise he had never given anyone before, because he had never meant anything like this for anyone before. Ada held his gaze for a long, trembling moment, then moved her hand to his cheek, a touch so gentle it made him close his eyes. When he opened them again, she was still there, still close, still unafraid, still choosing him despite everything she had seen. Outside, the sun finally broke through the clouds, sending light across the room. Inside, Lucas felt something he had never felt in his entire life. He felt her beginning to open the locked doors inside him one by one. And for the first time, he feared the light far more than the darkness, because if he let her all the way in, she would have the power to break the one thing no enemy had ever touched. His heart. Ada didn't leave the penthouse for 2 days, not because she was afraid to go outside, but because Lucas wouldn't allow even a shadow near her until he knew who had ordered the attack. His men searched the city. Reports came in every hour, but none of it calmed the restless storm inside him. He checked the doors twice, the windows 3 times, the security feeds again and again, as if danger could slip through cracks only he could see. Every instinct he had was sharp, ready, merciless. Ada hadn't asked him to protect her, but now that someone had touched what mattered to him, Lucas felt as if the entire world had been placed on a trigger. Meanwhile, Ada moved through the penthouse like a quiet beam of light. She made tea in the mornings, hummed soft tunes while sitting near the balcony, and watched Lucas with an expression he was not used to seeing. It wasn't fear. It wasn't pity. It was something far more dangerous for a man like him, trust. On the 3rd night, she found him in the workshop, pacing like a cornered predator. The cello lay unfinished on the bench, and his hands were stained with varnish and tension. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. Lucas didn't notice until her voice broke the silence. "You haven't slept in 2 days." He didn't respond. Sleep had become impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Ada tied to that chair, saw the bruises, saw the terror someone had dared to put in her breath. She approached slowly, stopping only when she stood directly in front of him. Lucas expected her to tell him to rest, expected her to pull away from the intensity he couldn't disguise. Instead, she reached out and touched his chest lightly over his heartbeat. "You can't protect me if you destroy yourself." The words struck deeper than any weapon. Lucas swallowed hard, the weight of everything he felt pressing against his ribs. He stepped back, just slightly overwhelmed by the closeness, overwhelmed by the truth she offered him without hesitation. Ada lowered her gaze for a moment, then looked up again, her voice softer than before, but sharper too. "You keep waiting for me to be afraid of you," she said. "But I'm not afraid, Lucas. I'm afraid of the people trying to hurt you." He had heard confessions before from enemies, from allies, from dying men who begged for their lives, but nothing had ever stolen the breath from his chest the way her words did. She was afraid for him, not of him. Lucas moved before he realized it, closing the distance between them. His hand lifted slowly, careful not to touch her without permission, and Ada leaned into the space he offered as if she had been waiting for him to reach out. The moment hung between them, charged, fragile, real. Lucas could feel every wall, every layer, every piece of armor inside him shifting. He could burn down the world for her, but now he understood the truth he never expected to face. He would burn down himself too, if it meant keeping her safe. The truth arrived like a warning shot. Just before dawn, Lucas's men returned with information that cut through the fragile calm he and Ada had built in the last days. A rival syndicate leader named Salvatore Vescari had ordered the attack. It wasn't meant to kidnap Ada, it was meant to deliver a message to Lucas, a message that he had a weakness, now a woman. Lucas stood at the center of the penthouse. While the report was delivered, his jaw tight, his eyes darker than a loaded gun. His men waited for orders, but Lucas didn't speak. His silence was more dangerous than shouting. It meant he was thinking. It meant someone wouldn't live long. But before he could reach for his coat, Ada stepped between him and the door. "You're going to him," she said, her voice trembling with fear, not of Lucas, but of what he was about to become. Lucas said nothing. The storm inside him was too loud, too violent. Ada placed both hands on his chest, stopping him, as if she believed she could hold back the weight of a man the city feared. Lucas's breath hitched at her touch, because she was the only person alive who dared to stand in front of him like this. "If you go like this," she whispered, "you won't come back the same." Lucas closed his eyes, fighting the pull of her voice, the softness he craved and feared. Ada continued, her words gentle, but sharp enough to cut through his ray. "This is exactly what they want, Lucas. They want you blinded by anger. They want you reckless. They want you bleeding." He tried to step past her, but she caught his arm, her grip small but unwavering. "Please look at me." He did, and the second their eyes met, his anger shifted. It didn't disappear, but it changed shape, becoming something colder, more controlled. Ada saw it happen, saw the way her presence steadied him, and she softened, visibly relieved. Then she said something that shattered the last piece of distance between them. "I can't lose you." The confession punched straight through the steel around his heart. Lucas felt his breath falter, felt a tremor shake through him, because no one had ever said those words to him. No one had ever needed him in a way that wasn't born of fear or power. Ada stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "They came after me to hurt. You don't give them the satisfaction of breaking you too." Lucas reached up slowly, letting his hand rest against her cheek. She leaned into his palm with complete trust, and something raw opened inside him, something he had buried long ago. "You won't lose me," he said, his voice low, steady. "I swear that on everything I am." Ada exhaled shakily, and for a moment it felt like the world around them slowed, the danger, the enemies, the city, all fading beneath the weight of the truth between them. But then footsteps approached from the hallway, urgent, quick. One of Lucas's guards appeared in the doorway, breathing hard. "Boss, there's something else. Vescari isn't working alone." Ada's grip on Lucas tightened, and the guard continued. "Someone close to you betrayed you." The room froze, the air thickening, as a new storm began to rise, one far more dangerous than the last. Because enemies he could destroy, but a traitor inside his own walls. That was a wound aimed directly at Ada and directly at his heart. And Lucas, Morty had no intention of letting either bleed. The name of the traitor dropped into Lucas's world like a blade meant for his spine. His guard hesitated before saying it, which told Lucas everything he needed to know even before the word finally escaped trembling lips. "Marco." Silence cracked through the room. Marco had been with Lucas for a decade, loyal, trusted, protective, a man Lucas treated like a younger brother. He had held Lucas's secrets, guarded his borders, shed blood for the Morty name. And now he had sold information to Vescari. Information about Ada. Information meant to wound the one place Lucas had never allowed anyone to touch. Ada's hand tightened around Lucas's arm, her breath held in her chest. She could see the shift inside him, the way betrayal carved deeper than any enemy's knife. He didn't shout. He didn't rage. He simply lowered his head, letting the truth settle like ash. "Where's he?" Lucas asked quietly. The guard swallowed hard, basement level, guarded, but refusing to speak. Lucas nodded, once, then turned to Ada. She stepped in front of him, blocking his path, not with force, but with the strength of someone who knew exactly what line he was about to cross. "You can't go down there like this," she whispered. "He will twist your anger. He will make you do something you can't undo." Lucas raised his eyes to hers, and Ada saw something inside him she had never witnessed before, not violence, not rage, but pain, real, sharp, unfinished pain. "He betrayed you, Lucas," she said softly, "but that doesn't mean you have to lose yourself to him." Lucas brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering just a moment longer than necessary. "I won't lose myself," he said, "but I will not let him near you again." Those words were a vow born from the deepest part of him. He went downstairs, leaving Ada with his guard, but not before she gripped his hand and whispered, "Come back to me." Lucas didn't know how to answer with words, so he answered by gripping her hand back, one silent promise exchanged between them. The basement was lit by a single flickering bulb, the air thick with betrayal. Marco sat in a chair, bound but defiant. He lifted his head as Lucas entered, a twisted smile forming across his bruised face. "I told Vescari where to find her," Marco spat, "because she made you weak, because you stopped being the man we followed." Lucas stepped closer, his shadow swallowing the room. "Weak," he repeated the word like a threat, like a judgment. Marco leaned forward, eyes dark with jealousy. "I saw the way you changed for her, the way you looked at her. She made you small." Lucas's jaw clenched as the final piece of truth slid into place. Marco hadn't betrayed him for money or power. He had betrayed him out of envy, because Ada had reached a place no one else could reach. Lucas did not touch him. He didn't need to. His voice alone carried the weight of a sentence. "You never understood strength," he said quietly. "Strength isn't the darkness, it's who gives you a reason to step out of it." For the first time, Marco's expression faltered, fear replacing arrogance. Lucas turned and walked away, not out of mercy, but out of victory. He didn't need to break Marco. Marco had already broken himself. When Lucas reached the penthouse, Ada ran to him, without hesitation, wrapping her arms around him, as if she had been holding her breath the whole time. He held her just as tightly, letting the betrayal, the danger, the storm settle behind him. Ada pulled back only enough to look into his eyes and whispered, "Lucas, you didn't lose yourself." And for the first time in his life, he believed it, because somehow through all the darkness, all the danger, all the breaking pieces, he had found the one person who didn't fear his shad. She only feared losing him, and that made her the strongest thing he had ever known.